Everybody, welcome to Hair Metal Revolution. I have a co-host today. You guys know Brian from Hair Band Basement. We just did an Ozzy Osbourne top 5 show last week, top 5 blues rock last week, and we got a special guest today. I'm so excited. Peter Margolis and Brian Ranks, who were there during the Sunset Strip. He was there during the beginning of meeting Randy Rhoads, a student himself, a collective of Marshall's amp. We're going to go through from the history, from the beginning, all the way up to what projects they're doing now. So people, we're just going to get this started. So we'll just start from the beginning. So Peter, about 1978, is that a good time when you kind of learn about Randy Rhoads? And like, I want to know, like, how does somebody become a teacher from a guitar player at the time was in Quiet Riot? Like, was that his side gig? Is that how he made money? You know, until
exactly.
You get
yeah, his gig. It was his main gig. Yeah. His mother owned a music school, and it was a little small house in North Hollywood that was turned into a school. So there was, and you walk in to what probably would have been like a entryway living room area. There was a desk there, and to the left was Mrs. Rhoads' room where she taught. And then you would walk down a hall, and there were a couple of rooms that were probably bedrooms. And Randy was in, I think, the first or second room on the right. And I discovered him because I was 18 years old, going to UCLA. And I had been, my whole childhood was spent playing guitar as a classical guitar player and a jazz guitar player. I went to jazz school in LA called Dick Grove, and it's no longer there, but it was in Studio City, and I studied with a lot of great jazz players, and I had classical teachers. I didn't know the first thing about rock and roll guitar. I did everything with my hands. I didn't hold a pick. I put the guitar over my left leg. I had my foot on a stool, and I played, that way. And I was driving home from school one day and flipping around the radio stations, and I came across this station called KROQ, and they used to play local bands. And I heard this song. I came in probably about a minute in, and it was called Slick Black Cadillac. And they were playing a 45 or the LP of the Quiet Riot Sony records. That they had 2 Sony records. Slick Black Cadillac was on the second one, and they had also pressed a single of it. And they were playing the song, and I heard that guitar sound and was like, the DJ came on and said, "That's Quiet Riot's new single. They're playing, Friday night at the Starwood, and tickets are $3 and 2 shows, and they're playing with, whatever band they were. I think they were playing with Smile or Snow or, Exciter or any one of those bands that were, on those bills with them at the time." And I went down to see him. I had never been to a club. I had never seen, any local bands. I had been to one concert at that time, one rock show. A couple years earlier, a friend took me to see Robin Trower at the Long Beach Arena. That was the first rock show I'd ever been to. Quiet Riot playing at the Starwood in 1978 was the second show. So I went by myself. I sat down at a little table waiting for the band, and on the table was a little card that said, "Join the Quiet Riot fan club, $2. So I filled out the card and took it home, put a stamp on it, sent it to a girl named Lori Holland, who was the president of the Quiet Riot fan club, with my $2, shoved it in an envelope, mailed it. And a week or so later, in the mail, I got a package, and there was a newsletter, a Quiet Riot t-shirt, this shirt right here, and a 8x10, which is this 8x10. And later, I don't know if you can read it. There's a bad glare, but Randy signed it. There it is. So you can see he wrote to Peter, a great guitar player and a nice guy. Good luck with your group, Randy Rhoads. So I think the very first time I went in to take a lesson, I brought that with me. I ended up with him for 2 years. But anyway, this newsletter that I got talked about what each guy in the band did besides, playing in the band. And Randy's thing said, he teaches at his mom's school, Musonia, and I think it was $8 an hour or $8 a half an hour, something like that. And call this number and sign up for lessons. And I just saw the show, and he was, you couldn't take your eyes off him. He was the whole show. And so I called, and I got lessons set up for Fridays at 4:00. And I would go every Friday for the next 2 years. And, he was, you knew the second you saw him, second you walked in the room, second you shook his hand, second you sat down, you knew he was not the same as you and I. He just wasn't. There are certain people in the world, where you meet them and you just understand their celebrity, whether they're the president of the United States or whether they're, some great musician or some, great, whatever, baseball player, football player, whatever, when you meet Michael Jordan or Sandy Koufax or Eddie Van Halen or Randy Rhoads or, President Bill Clinton or whoever you meet, why they are who they are and why they are where they are. Was he teaching
more like classical versus rock? Because we all know that Randy loves classical.
He didn't at the time. He was a rock player.
Okay.
In 1978, he wasn't into classical yet. So when I went to him initially, I did not have a Strat or a Les Paul or anything. I had my jazz guitar. I had my classical guitar. That's all I had. I didn't know how to play a pentatonic scale. I didn't know how to hold a pick. I didn't know how to bend a note. That wasn't done in classical and jazz. Yeah. But I was fascinated by what he did because I couldn't do any of it. And so I went to him and said, I want to learn what you do. And he said, okay, well, can you play something for me? So I put my guitar on my leg and I played some Bach or some, Scriabin or something classical piece that I knew. And, he was basically said, what are you doing here? And I said, because I can do this, but I can't do what you do. And I said, I want to learn what you do. And he was like, wow, okay. And so we started at the beginning, here's how you hold a pick. Here are the pentatonic scales. And, because I had facility, I picked it up pretty quickly. And he wrote out all the, pentatonic scales, all the major scales and the, minor scales and the harmonic minor and melodic minor. And then we went through diminished and all that's all the basic harmony stuff, which, fell into place pretty quickly. And, he would ask me to play for him, a lot. And he would say, what are you doing? How are you doing? Because it was just different from what he did.
So he really cared. He really cared about your playing.
And so, we developed a pretty good rapport because, I was as different than his other students. I just had a different set of, skills. And by the time I was done with him, which would have been early 80, I had joined a band. And by this time got a, Les Paul and got a Strat and got a couple Marshalls and got some pedals and was now deep into it, 2 years later of practicing, hours and hours every single day. By the end of it, I was, pretty decent. And I remember one of the last times I saw him was I played at the Starwood in late 79, early 80, and he came to the show with Jody and Lori. And it was, it was amazing. And I think I saw him one or two other times out away from the lessons. We had become friendly, but I mean, not like he was with, his tight group of friends, but we were, friendly towards one another. We talked on the phone a couple times when he came back to LA from being on tour and writing and recording. He came home a couple times. He would call a few of his students and say, hey, I'm here for 2 weeks. come on down, let's have a lesson.
Cool.
And so he called
That's
me,
cool.
he called, I don't know, half a dozen other people. So I saw him, I guess, between Blizzard and Diary when he was off, whatever that was.
How many musicians do that? Come from tour and call students, they come over, let's hear it. That's
let's do lessons.
Unusual.
Not a lot.
I guess he needed that $8 an hour.
Yeah.
Peter Brian, I always wanted to know this. I know this is you guys be guessing on this a little bit, but I was always curious because when he was with Quiet Riot before he joined Ozzy, 1978, we all know Van Halen broke loose everywhere, and we all know Randy had that sound himself. Was there you guys, with your opinion, how come Quiet Riot at that time couldn't get signed like Van Halen before he joined Ozzy? I mean, it's kind of weird. Like you said, he was a sinner. You went to see this band because Randy took over the show.
So I think, it's a combination of
right time, right place kind of deal.
Well, with Van Halen, it was not only Eddie, but it was Dave. Dave was an amazing, amazing front man.
The whole thing.
Yep. And it was the songs. They had all the songs that were on the first record, and they're great, amazing pop rock songs. And Eddie was amazing, and Dave was amazing, and right time, right. Ted Templeman walking in, calling Mo Austin, rainy night at the Starwood. We all know the story. Quiet Riot, although they were great because of Randy, Kevin at that time wasn't as developed as he was in, later years when Quiet Riot really blew up. He had gotten better by that time, but they just didn't have the material.
Not yet.
They had Slick Black Cadillac, but they didn't have Bang Your Head yet.
Yeah,
they didn't have any of those songs. I mean, those were a product of, sort of Kevin meeting Carlos and what Carlos brought to it. And, many years later, Kevin had more time to develop his songwriting and more time, and the chemistry between he and Carlos was great. Not that it wasn't great with Randy, but they just didn't have the material. And I think Van Halen was an anomaly because at that time in LA, 77, 78, 79, that was punk and
disco,
new wave. And it was the end of disco and it was the beginning of punk. And the Van Halen signing was, bands like that just weren't getting signed, but they were so unique and so special. And Ted Templeman saw something. But Quiet Riot, and believe me, they tried. They had, a day where they went from record company to record company and had all of their fans, down in the lobby and down in the street holding signs, picketing, sign Quiet Riot, sign Quiet Riot.
Yeah.
And they would spend an hour at Capitol and then an hour at Warner Brothers, and they would go around in this bus with their signs and they did everything to try to get a record deal. And they just did not have the material or the chemistry or whatever it was that, he did have, when they got on Pasha and they, in 85 or whenever that was, and with Frankie Benelli, that chemistry worked. It didn't work in 78, 79 because just their material wasn't strong enough.
Yeah, I always thought it was cool when Randy would come home from the Ozzy tour and he still played once in a while with Quiet Riot, get on stage with them.
Only once.
Just once?
Only once did he go on stage and play with Quiet Riot.
I mean, that's really cool.
He didn't bring his guitar. I don't think he intended to because he was using, Quiet Riot. After Randy left, Kevin got sort of a bunch of guys and tried different guitar players. Bobby Steffen was one. Carlos was one. I don't remember. There was a lot of them. And it was sort of a, rotating thing. And for a while, the band was called Dobro. And I think Greg Leon was one of the guitar players. And then that's when Randy came back to LA and went down to see him play and jumped up and grabbed whose ever guitar. It was I think a Flying V, and did a couple songs. but I don't think it was intended that he would play with them, because he would have obviously had his gear there, and he didn't. He used what was ever on stage. I mean, he was just, Randy was a guitar player and a guitar teacher, and that's what interested him.
Yeah,
that's what he wanted to do.
Quiet and so nice. Any interview you see of him, he never was outspoken at all. He was just, you could tell he loved that classical. He was just. Now, Peter, you yourself said you were in a band, and if I remember correctly, you guys had a manager that actually managed bands like Motley Crue and some big bands out there. So you yourself had some big managers.
We got close. So I started in 80, late 79, early 80 with a band. I think we did, I don't know, half a dozen gigs. And then, as they go, somebody leaves, and, drummer quits, and now you got to find another drummer, and then the bass player quits. And then, so I think we had like 3 different names and 3 different versions of that original band. And then somewhere around 81 or 82, that band exploded. And I said, you know what, I'm starting new. And I ran a ad in the, Recycler, whatever it was, looking for, guys, different direction, wanted to, heavier, harder. And because, now by 82, it was really becoming hair metal, and the Sunset Strip was exploding, and there were more clubs and more people coming to LA. And so, and Van Halen was huge, and all these other, bands were starting to populate in LA. So so I started a band called Stainless Steel, and we had, I met the drummer first, and then we started holding auditions for bass players, and then 20 or 30 guys, in and out the door. We finally found a bass player, and then started to get our material together. The drummer was the singer initially until we found a lead singer. And again, auditioning 20 or 30 guys. And then we found a guy named John Pratt, and off we went. And we did about 82, 83 with John. And then we got, we did okay. And then it just wasn't working with John. And so we decided to find a new singer, and we found a guy after a couple months, and it just clicked. He had a heavier voice and a rougher voice, and it just worked better. John's was more like a Steve Perry type voice, and Grant was, just a heavier voice, and it just blended with the music better. And that, at that time, was when I met Jennifer Perry and Vicki Hamilton, and they had a management company with a guy named Robert Berman called Half Wet Productions. And they had Odin, and they had early Guns N' Roses, and they had Faster Pussycat, and I don't know, 4 or 5 bands, and us. And so I think there were 5 bands on their roster. And Jennifer Perry, besides being a manager, was also the booking agent at the Troubadour. Jennifer just passed away, and there's a big show coming up, I think next week or the next couple of weeks, at the Troubadour, that Vicki and Slash are holding this, event for Jennifer. But Jennifer, Vicki, and Robert made up this management team, and they managed all these acts. We were one of them. So, we started getting better gigs because Jennifer would give us, Saturday night, the main slot at the Troubadour. And then we were getting whiskey gigs, and there was a big club in the Valley called the Country Club. And we were getting, Saturday night headlining gigs. And it was great for a couple of years. Everything was wonderful until it wasn't, And as these things go, in March of 85, we had a bad gig, and sound system was shit, and we didn't play great, and whatever. The think we brought our gear back to where we were rehearsing, and everybody went home. And a couple nights later, we were gonna, work out some new material. And I was there, the drummer was there, singer walked in and said, "Hey guys, this is not happening for me anymore. I'm going to join a band called Salty Dog." And the bass player walked in and said, "What's happening?" And I said, "Well, Grant's leaving." And he goes, "Well, if he's leaving, I'm leaving." And he left, the singer left, and I was looking at the drummer. And I said, "Isn't this exactly where we were 5 years ago?" Like literally starting over. And at that time, I was 25, and I just didn't want. I wasn't 18. I didn't want to start over again at 25, and have it be 5 more years. And then I was 30, and it's still not happening. And I just felt like, I did it for 5 years. And it was all day, every day, all night. I had a job, but still, if I wasn't at work, I was promoting. I was, we were rehearsing, we were recording, we were doing shows, we were,
it's another job altogether.
It was a full-time job besides having a full-time job.
Yeah.
And it just, I didn't want to end up, as a casualty. And thankfully, I got out because the scene changed pretty radically, and Nirvana came in, and all these bands, and that's what killed hair metal. And I got out just in time. And I loved the 5 years I did it. I loved my time taking lessons from Randy. I have great memories. There's a lot of video. There's a ton of pictures, my hair was brown, not gray. I was 40 pounds lighter, what it's like when you're in your 20s. And they were great times. And, thankfully, I never did drugs. I didn't smoke. I'm not a drinker. So my memories of that time are pretty clear. And, what I can't remember, we have photos of, and we have videos of. And, I survived it. I'm one of, several that survived, because there's a lot of folks that didn't make it through that period. And, Brian can tell you from his side, Brian came to LA from, the East Coast in the early 80s, and he experienced, Sunset Strip and hair metal from his side of it, which was a tech side, and which he can talk about all the bands he teched for. Go, Brian.
All of 82 was when I moved to Los Angeles from Western New York. And I came out here. I was fortunate. I got a job within 4 days of arriving in LA.
Wow.
And I had a room full, or a house full of roommates that were all musicians and stuff at the time. And literally within a couple of weeks of being in LA, I was already hanging out with people that were in working bands, and shortly thereafter I was doing all the club scene around LA with various bands, and all the Sunset Strip gigs, and the Country Club, and the Troubadour, and the Whiskey, and the Roxy, and unfortunately the Starwood had closed a couple of months before I arrived in LA, so I did all the cool stuff at the Starwood Club. But I was doing stuff on the Sunset Strip all through the mid and late 80s and early 90s and stuff. And after a couple of years of doing that stuff around town, I ended up, working with different friends on major touring acts, and it mushroomed out from there into a 40-year career of being guitar and bass and sometimes keyboard tech on major tours for big stars. So I'm at the point now where I'm semi-retired from all of it because I'm worn out.
Yeah. Where in Western New York were you from?
Near Jamestown, New York, which is just shortly across the border from Erie, PA.
Yeah. Okay, I know exactly where that is. Yeah, my college is in Olean in Allegheny.
That area of the country, is nothing pretty much but dairy farming and lumbering.
My wife's from Cortland, New York.
Okay, yeah. I used to go through Cortland on the way to college all the time.
I'm visiting Cortland this year. We go to New York like every other year.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
Yeah,
so, Brian, when you first moved to the Sunset, of course, there's no internet back then. Everything that I've learned through magazines or, Headbangers Ball on a VHS tape. Was bands like do shows and then they party afterwards? Was it really like that crazy? Like every single spot had bands? Was it really alive as what we heard?
In the 80s, the whole music scene here in Los Angeles was completely the opposite of what I had grown up doing in Western New York, Pennsylvania, corner of Ohio kind of thing. We travel around in those days, in the late 70s, first couple of years of the 80s, we actually made money going around playing shows. we would buy kegs of beer and throw parties, a ton of money. And just that kind of, and we came out to Los Angeles, and it was the opposite. Bands had to pay the clubs to get their foot in the door and do a show.
Yeah.
Yep.
You had to buy 100 tickets and sell them or not sell them, but you had to buy them to get on the bill and be on the show. And
these exposure.
Wow.
From 4 to 6 bands in a row every freaking night. And so you'd come on, you'd play for a half hour, 40, 45 minutes, get your stuff out, they'd kick you out the back door, the next act would start. And the whole Sunset Strip with all these bands trying to get record deals was like this. It was a zoo on the Sunset Strip.
Mm-hmm.
It had multiple clubs all within a 2-3 block area, and everybody just walked back and forth.
And I'm sure not everybody had money to buy 100 tickets to get on a bill,
No.
A lot of them were poor.
No. Yeah, they got enough money for ramen for dinner later, hopefully.
Yeah. Their girlfriends had money.
That's what it was, yes.
You had to guarantee the club that you could put asses in the seat or they didn't want anything to do with you.
That's amazing.
It sort of turned like that, I'm going to say, in 82, 83. Prior to that, late 79, 80, 81, that wasn't the case, because I still have everything from my band, and we would get a sheet at the end of the night, and it would say how many tickets were sold, and whatever. They would itemize everything, and they would say, we get 50% of the door, you get 50%, you sold 300 seats at $5 a seat, and they would do the math, and they would hand us a sheet and then hand us a check or hand us cash, and we would actually get paid. Somewhere around 82 or 83, they started to realize, hey, wait a minute, we got guys that'll play here for free. They just want to get on stage. We can make more money. And then it went from that to, let's turn the tables. Now you're going to have to pay to play.
There were so many fans to play.
Yeah, and so if you want to get up on stage and you want to be seen in front of maybe a record company executive or whoever's in the building, you better pre-sell. You better walk up and down the Sunset Strip and stand out in front of the Roxy and do whatever and give these tickets out that you paid for.
Yeah.
You might have gone in there and paid $200 or whatever to the club. They give you a bunch of tickets. You give those away. You better get those people in here. And they better buy drinks. And that's the way it became. But initially, like in the late 70s, early 80s, it was not like that. But it became that Brian's talking about, especially Madame Wong's, which is really prevalent there. Because I remember after my band, Stainless Steel, in 85, I continued for a couple months. And I started playing with a off and on with a band at Madame Wong's called Trash, which was Gilby Clarke and me and a bunch of other local guys. And Madame Wong's was brutal. You weren't going to make a penny there. There would be, Brian, 5-6 bands a night?
5-6 bands. Well, Madame Wong's West in Santa Monica had an upstairs stage and a downstairs stage. They would run between 4 and 6 acts a night.
Yeah.
That's
wow.
The building was new of gear coming and going out the back doors. As soon as you were done playing, your stuff got shoved outside and it was next contestant.
That's crazy. So you're paying for exposure and people might not even see you because you're upstairs and they're hanging out downstairs getting drinks.
And you're also...
Get off the stage, get out of here. It's somebody else's turn.
And there was also a publication that was really prominent back in those days, and there would be at every club, and there would be like stacks of BAM magazines called Bay Area Music, and BAM magazine, you'd open it up, and half of the magazine was bands advertising, and it was your picture and where you were playing, and the pictures were shot by the same 3 or 4 guys that shot these metal bands, and you see the big hair and and I remember our photo. We wanted to do something different, so we had this gigantic setup when we would go play. Literally, I would play with either 8 or 10 Marshall cabinets, like what's behind me, and that many heads. The drummer had a drum riser that sat 4 feet and spun. The bass player had a wall of SVTs, and our picture in BAM magazine was just of the gear. We weren't even in the picture. And it was like, come see Stainless Steel. This is what you're going to see. And, what it's going to sound like with that gear. So we tried, everybody had their gimmicks. Motley Crue had, their gimmick, and, everybody had their thing, and you tried to be different. All of our stuff was white, painted white. Everything, was white vinyl, white, whatever, white drum riser, white drums, just, and everybody had their thing, and some were successful, obviously Motley Crue, obviously, Rat, Poison, and Faster Pussycat, and then most others, like my band and Snow and Smile and all these other bands that didn't make it, fell by the wayside. And even those that went on to great success, now are having a tough time because nobody buys records, nobody buys CDs, nobody buys anything anymore because it's all accessible on the internet. So if you want to make any money, you have to go out on tour and charge exorbitant amount of money for tickets. And, people just, most of them don't have expendable cash like that to, purchase a ticket for hundreds and hundreds of dollars to go see an act they want to see. So it's
what's hard, Peter, guys like myself and Brian from Hairband Basement, like we do shows, we do top 5, some music and stuff. And we want to play like clips of the song because when people hear it, it'll make people want to listen to it, stream for it. But these record companies like, oh no, you only do 7 seconds. Yeah. You can't do 20 seconds. And it's not like we're trying to play the whole song. We want to play parts of it. And
there's a thing called fair use.
Yes, but on YouTube,
YouTube's an issue with it.
They do.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Well, I think
it's not. You're right. Well, you're sorry, Peter. Go ahead.
No, Peter is absolutely 100% correct. See, Peter, you're 100% correct. Like if their claim comes down, you can put in fair use act, right? But it goes back to that original claimer. They can just turn it down.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you have this law that protects you, and who has the money to keep getting lawyers to say, hey, I have the right to use it.
It doesn't hold up in court. Like if it were to go that far, back in the day when I was doing stuff where I had to license clips and or license music, if you couldn't get the writers and the publishers and everybody to agree, you could claim fair use, but I think it was 15 seconds. It had to be sort of, this is, newsworthy. Like, I'm talking about something and I need to show this clip to, basically show the viewers, this is what it looked like. This is what it sounded like. Here's a little snippet. You can't use a whole song unless you get everybody, you pay for it.
And we know that.
You get somebody to sign off. It's very tricky.
Well, so you just said a key thing. It's like, well, you can beat that in court. I don't have the time to drag that out in court and go in and deal with that. It's just like, it's easy to cut the song out.
Yeah.
But to go what Eric is saying, it's like we're trying to get this music out there. It's not like we're trying to rip them off, rip off artists or get money from. It's like we want people to know this stuff and be able to hear it. And these barriers constantly stop us. It's a constant.
That is why sound-alikes were created. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of composers, especially guys from back in the day in the 80s and 90s. A lot of my friends who didn't go on to become successful, rock stars and didn't, now aren't doing the cruises and whatever. If they had a music background like I did in a music education, you got yourself a studio and you got a computer and you got some keyboards and you started making tapes and sending them out. And I have a couple good friends that make their living doing sound-alikes. So they can basically recreate the drum sound and the bass sound and the guitar sound of whatever they're trying to recreate. It's very easy now to do that. Mm-hmm. And, write music in the style of whatever you're trying to, like Van Halen, like Led Zeppelin, like, Journey, Foreigner, whatever. You can get all those sounds on the computer very easily with all these digital platforms. And you create sound-alikes that sounded like it could have been a Journey song, sounded like it could have been a Foreigner song. And that's how you get around it. It's not that song. It's a different chord progression. It's a different key. It's a different tempo. It's a different whatever, but it's close. You get the idea. And that's how a lot of soundtracks are built. If you want to do a period piece and you can't get, a Beach Boys song or you can't get an Elton John song, well, you can create something. I mean, certainly AI can do it now.
Yes.
You just go, hey, create a Beach Boys, a song that sounds like In My Room, or a song that sounds like Wouldn't It Be Nice? And that AI thing is going to spit out a chord progression and something that sounds just like it. But it isn't it. And it's far enough away that you can't get sued. It's a different set of lyrics, or and if you get too close to it, like there've been lawsuits, George Harrison was involved in one, and, where it's like, it's too close to, something. It's the same melody. It's the same chord progression with the same melody in the same key, in the same tempo. It's too close. I'm going to sue you because obviously I created that and you copied it. But if you get far enough away and the keys are different, or there's a key change that wasn't in the original, or the melody is different enough, or it's a different tempo, it's whatever, you can, sort of weave around it.
There was that huge lawsuit case with Huey Lewis with the song "I Want a New Drug" and Ghostbusters. Apparently they had the same sound. There was a big lawsuit, and then
look, here's the thing: there's 12 notes in the world.
Yeah,
okay? That's all there are. That is it. There's 12 notes. There's 12 keys, and there's
sound like something.
There's only so many permutations of that. And it's also very hard to write an original song when you're constantly inundated with other people's music. I mean, you can go, okay, I'm not going to listen to the radio. I'm not going to listen to my records. I'm going to walk around with blinders on and just not hear anything because I've got to write a song that hasn't been written yet. But again, you only have 12 notes, and in each key, there's only 8 notes. 7 of them are different. One is an octave. If you're in the key of C, it's, all the white notes, C to C to C. So you have 7 notes to work with, and you have 7 chords to work with if you want to be in the C, key of C. And you have patterns, 2, 6, 4, 5, 1. Songs are all written in, patterns. Typically 4, 5, 1 is a pop pattern. 2, 2, 6, 4, 5, 1. 2, 5, 1 is, a lot of jazz. D minor to G7 to C, for example, in the key of C. A lot of jazz songs, 2-5-1, 2-5-1, 2-5-1. So, you start, you write something and go, okay, well, that pattern's been used over and over and over. I think there's a YouTube clip where these guys play a chord pattern that's been used in 25 songs, and they just keep playing the pattern but sing different lyrics and different melodies over it because it's the same chord progression over and over and over and over again. So it's very tricky, to write something that hasn't been heard before.
You can also have it in the back of your head. You might have heard the song on the radio when you were 7. And all of a sudden, when you're 21, you come up with a riff, and it's like you don't remember hearing that original song. And next thing you know, the lawyers are saying, "Wait a minute, you got the same one here."
It's somewhere in your subconscious.
Yeah.
classic example of all this is in my career. I did 7 years of touring with Michael Bolton. Michael Bolton got, as soon as Michael Bolton got famous and sold millions of records, everybody wanted a piece of it. And he became in the 90s one of the most sued artists for copyright infringements. And a couple of them were like, okay, I can see that. And a couple of them were like, how do you say that this song is the same as the other? I don't see any. But he lost them. And so he lost 2 or 3. He won a couple, but he lost 2 or 3 or 4 lawsuits on copyright infringements. And it was because he was worth millions and millions of dollars. And everybody went, oh, you sold a couple million copies of that song. Well, you know what? That sounds a lot like something I wrote. And, you know, let's take it to court and see if I can get a couple $100,000 out of the deal.
Yeah, no one's gonna sue you when you have no money. Who gives a shit?
Nobody sues a nobody.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
No, I listened to Tom Kiefer of Cinderella in an interview once. He said, you know, almost every guitar sound, you know, came from somewhere like in the 40s, whatever. You know, they take a sound, they bend it. This band bends it, and then this band will copy Led Zeppelin, and then this band will copy this band. So every sound started from like the 40s and 50s, but everybody bends it differently. And it's a new song, but the influence is all there from all the previous bands that took that same sound and they keep changing it. So no matter what, like you said, Peter, it's all going to connect.
Yeah.
Until you get somebody like Jimi Hendrix, where it's like, holy shit, this is something that has never been heard before. Yeah. And it was, you know, the perfect storm for him because, Hendrix became famous in 67 and basically Marshall became famous in 67, even though the company existed since 63, 64, 65, 6, they were basically hand making their stuff. Hendrix came along and discovered Marshall because Eric Clapton was using them, and it was all happening in the mid 60s in England. And Hendrix goes on these, big stages with these Marshalls behind him, playing a Fender Stratocaster, and all of a sudden, and changes everything. Nobody had ever heard that sound with a fuzz pedal and a wah and a univibe and his style of playing, and because that had not been heard, and it wasn't sort of rediscovered and again until Eddie Van Halen flipped everything, and all of a sudden took a Fender Strat that always had single coil pickups and, shoved a humbucking pickup in it. And nobody had ever used a Variac before. Nobody ever thought, well, let me drop the voltage down from 120 to 90, see what that does to the amp. Well, it changes the sound of the amp, and it changes the properties. And these Marshalls don't sound the same when when you're starving them at 90 volts versus 120. And a Strat doesn't sound the same with that pickup in it. And all of the things, all of the ingredients that went into creating that sound, not to mention his hands and his brain. Yeah. But that was all new. Nobody had done that before. People had done tapping, and people obviously played, power chords and, bent notes and did things like that, but they didn't do it like him. And he completely flipped it on its side. And then there's other people that came out with sounds like Yngwie. Nobody ever played that style of music with that sound that way until he came out. So there's a few pioneers where you go, that changed everything. But otherwise, like Tom Kiefer is saying, yes, you can go back to, Les Paul and Mary Ford in the 50s, and you can look and go, okay, so that's where this guy got it from, many different permutations later.
Well, that's the whole thing with inventing anything. It's not coming up with something completely new. It's taking things that exist and combining them in a different way.
Trust me, my father was an inventor. I know this very well. He had invention after invention after invention. And finally, in 1971, he landed on something that had never been done before. And our lives changed radically as a family in 71 when my dad's product hit the market. And all of a sudden we went from a lower middle class family to, everything changed. My father got very wealthy very fast. And
are you able to say what the product was?
Yeah, because I think the patents run out. He sold it. My father's not with us anymore, but he was working for my grandfather, who was a builder in Los Angeles, and my grandfather built large homes and apartment buildings, and my dad was a property manager, so he was going around and collecting rents and getting toilets fixed and doing all the thing that a property manager does.
Yeah.
And many of these apartments were in Hollywood in the late 60s and early 70s, and Hollywood was starting to turn a little bit downward, and places were getting broken into, and people were, coming home and finding out their apartments had been ransacked. So my dad hired an electrical engineer and said, I want to come up with a system whereby we can have a lobby with a locked front door, and somebody comes to the front door and wants to get in. Well, all your visitors don't have keys, and there's no cell phones to call the person in the apartment. Mm-hmm. So, and obviously the only thing were landlines back then. So, what am I going to do? Run all the way home and say, hey, I'll be there in 20 minutes and run back. And the person has to, So the system is you would go to an apartment building and there was a, registry with the names of, everybody. And it would say, Eric, apartment 101. And you would push the button and Eric's phone would ring in his apartment. And he'd say, hey, Peter, yeah, let me let you in. And you press the number 9 and a relay would trigger and the door would open. You'd open up the door. And it was called the EntraGuard. And that was my father's invention.
Wow. Holy crap.
And
wow.
It was it ended up in every single apartment building.
I wouldn't even think of that.
In the world. And, so that's what I grew up with from the time I was 10, 11 years old. All of a sudden our lives changed. My parents' cars went from a Chevy Impala and a Buick Skylark to Mercedes and BMWs. And all of a sudden there's, tennis lessons from the local pro and the Hillcrest Country Club and, all this crazy stuff that comes from creating something that had never been created.
Yeah. It had great value.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So Peter, we got about 10 minutes left. I want to get into, because you and Brian, I know, Peter, you're a collector of Marshalls. And Brian, are you a collector of Marshalls yourself?
Let me just say this quickly. I owe everything basically in my collection to my association with Brian. I came to the party when I met Brian in 94. I had, I think, 20 Marshall cabinets, 20 heads. I started in stainless steel collecting them. I realized that these things I thought would have a value. When I met Brian in 94, after the big earthquake that we had, everything changed for me, everything. And he is very, very responsible for, I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Marshalls. And without Brian, my collection would not look anything like it does. Many of them have come from Brian being on the road and saying, hey, I'm working with this band. They're getting rid of, a bunch of gear. When they come off the road, I think I can get you these 2 pieces, or, hey, this guy's selling this. So a lot of my collection is because of my relationship with Brian and Brian's ability to take something that is really tattered. Like many of my pieces were bought off Craigslist or, somehow, and they had been on the road and dragged across stages, and the vinyl was missing from the bottom, and the feet were missing, or the wheels were missing, or the logo was broken, or the grill was torn. And Brian had this amazing relationship with Jim Marshall. And Brian was able to get the real stuff to replace a grill, replace a logo, to fix these things. And we knew guys that would recone speakers. And it's because of Brian that I was able to amass this collection. So anyway.
So it's his fault.
Yes, his fault.
And you sure you love the books.
So
people for making them spend money on lots of stuff. But when they look back at what they spent, what they thought was a fortune years ago, and now what it's worth, they're patting me on the back and saying, "Hey, thanks for talking me into buying this year."
So what happened was, Brian and I met in '94, became fast friends, and he helped me, acquire a lot of this collection. A lot of times I would, I'd be in stores, music stores. I'd pull over, I'd see something, I'd call him up. I go, I get him on FaceTime. I go, look at this. What is this? What is this? What is this? Should I get this? It's this price. And Brian would say, yes, it's got, the domed rivets. It has this, it has this, it has this. This is all the correct stuff. Open the back. Let me see the date codes and the frame numbers. And, and we would go through this thing on FaceTime, and he would go buy it. And so I would literally write a check, give the guy a credit card, whatever, bring it home, and Brian would take it back to his place and, put the screws on a wire wheel and do all this magic that he does and hand it back to me. And it would look like it just rolled off the factory floor, and it was 20, 30, 40, 50 years old. Mm-hmm. So what happened was, we had been working on this collection and, his collection for years and years and years and years and years. And we got to where we were both about late 50s and 60s and said, if we don't document this, what we've collected and what we're doing, it's going to die with us. Because although there's great books about Marshalls, the history of Marshall, volume 1 and 2, and all these different books, none of them contain the information that we had amassed with having our hands in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these amplifiers, because you start to learn there's patterns. Like, they would change every year. They would change the type of screw, or the type of rivet, or the type of grill, or the size of the logo, or, with corners, without corners. Every year they were doing something different. And if you're somebody that walks into Guitar Center and there's 20 Marshall cabinets there, and one of them's $500 and one of them is $5,000, how are you going to know the difference? And, so this book called Collecting Loud History, which Brian and I, let me see if I can get the glare off of it, which Brian and I created.
Want to pop it up one more time?
Okay.
You got the whole screen. There we go.
Great. So there's the book. It's, as you can see, large. It's a coffee table book. It weighs just under 8 pounds. And it's the story of our lives, basically, from, the first couple chapters is, the first one's about me. The second one's about Brian and how we met and what we created. And Brian's got a copy also, but it just goes year by year and talks about, the different pieces. And the cool thing about this book is there has never been anything that gets into the weeds like this one. I'll show you another picture. You can put it full screen, where we show every single angle of the various pieces.
Wow.
And not only that, but the receipts for every single piece that was purchased, and where it was purchased, and when, and what was paid for it. So you can see, I don't want people to think, oh, you're a millionaire and you're able to just go, buy anything you want. Not the case. When I started buying these, they were out of the recycler and out of Craigslist, and they were $200 and $300 a piece. And I was making $5 an hour working, some job, and I would save up $200, and I would look in the recycler and I'd find one and I'd run down and buy. I didn't know what I was buying, but it said Marshall on it and it looked cool. So I'll just buy it and throw it in a storage unit. And that's what I was doing. And then when I met Brian, after the earthquake and my stuff got hammered, Brian was like, well, what do you have? And I would go, yeah, I have a bunch of Marshalls. He'd go, okay, well, what does that mean? I don't know. I have 20 of them. And they go, no, what years are they? What models are they? What are they? And I was like, I don't know. So eventually he came over and looked at everything, and, and that was the beginning of my education, courtesy of Brian. And 40 years later, we were both smart enough and had the material and had the wherewithal and had all of this product to create this book. And it really is the Bible for, people who collect. And not only that, we hired really good book designer, really good, web designer, really great photographers. And the book is beautiful, whether you're a Marshall guy or collector or not. The photographs are stunning. The history is all there. And the thing that we decided to do was, for each chapter, we went year by year, starting in 64, because that was the first piece that we had, all the way up to 1980, which is sort of where our collection ends. We did it chapter by chapter, year by year, and we talked about what was going on in the world in 1974, and then segue to what was going on, in music in 1974, who was using this gear, what was happening in England at Marshall in 74. And then we show all the 74 pieces. We talk about how they were acquired, where they were acquired, and then what has been done to them to restore them. Some of them unrestored, unmolested, untouched. Others, ground up restoration. All done by Brian.
Are there any ones out there that, what's your holy grail of Marshalls that you're still trying to find?
Well, I have a few holy grail pieces.
Yeah.
But that's a great question. So, because Brian and I were talking about it, there is a Marshall amp. What is it, Brian? An organ model.
In 1967 and 1968 and 9, Marshall offered a 50-watt, what they called a quote-unquote organ setup. It was a standard 50-watt Marshall amplifier head, but it of resistors and cap values inside of it changed to give it slightly different voicing. You have the 50-watt bass amp, you have the 50-watt lead amp, and you have the 50-watt organ amp, which were all essentially the same circuit with just a couple of values here and there changed to give it a little bit of tonal difference between them. But they only sold those amps for 3 years, for keyboard players, and they never made any more. And a lot of them that got made at that time, because they didn't make a lot of quantity of them in those 3 years, a lot of them were taken to amp repair guys and converted into lead or bass amps instead of an organ amp.
So to find an original one that where the circuit hasn't been changed, is difficult. I don't have one. Brian doesn't have one. But for Holy Grail stuff,
I've only seen it.
I have a thing called the JTM 45-100, which was the very first Marshall made in the standard box. Prior to that, they were made in smaller boxes. They were called JTM 45s. They were very prevalent in 65 and 66. Mm-hmm. And then, the guys at the time were saying, hey, we need louder. We're starting to play these stadiums. And so they created the JTM 45/100. And it was a super lead and a super bass. And that was the very first 100-watt Marshall. And there's very few of them. They're very impossible to find. They're incredibly expensive. And the chassis frame was made out of aluminum, and the transformers were heavy, so most of them buckle. So to find one that's actually still flat and straight and where all the transformers are intact, and I was very lucky enough to, in my travels, have met a guy in England. Brian and I befriended this guy, and he had an ad in reverb.com for an amp, and I bought the amp, and he said, hey, is there anything else you're looking for? And that opened up, Pandora's box for me and Brian, because we ended up buying probably 40 pieces from this guy over years. Wow. And then luckily, by some fluke, about a decade ago, a guy from a store called Killer Vintage called me and said, hey, I heard about you and your obsession with Marshall amps and your knowledge about them. And I've got a client who's got a combo amp, and he's not sure what he has, and he's not sure if it's real or if it was, a little bit rejiggered, because there's a few combo amps, blues breakers especially, that, guys would take heads out of boxes and build combo boxes and sort of, make them, these blues, make them blues breaker amps when they really weren't intended to be that when they were made. So this guy sent me this combo amp, and he said, I have a client and he just wants you to look at it. So Brian and I pulled it apart. We literally pulled staples out and looked at the patina on the staples. Is this thing really from the 60s? Because it would look a certain way. And we pulled it out and started to read the part numbers off of the pots and off of the capacitors and the date codes. And you can see, yes, he was told it was a 64, and we discovered it wasn't. It was a 67. And he was told, this, and it's like, no, it is a real Marshall. It is a great amp. It's not what you were told, but it is real. And we learned that because we literally pulled it apart and got out, magnifying glasses. And we knew enough, having looked at enough of these. So we buttoned the amp back up and put everything back in and boxed it up. And they came and shipped it back to Killer Vintage. And he called me and said, thanks so much. My client wants to call you and just thank you and write you a check. And I said, he can call me. I love Marshalls. I don't need a check. And so, a couple minutes later, my phone rings and I pick up the phone. He goes, hey, Peter, this is Eric Johnson. And, I thought I was being punked. And, if you don't know who Eric Johnson is, he's probably one of the greatest living guitar players on the planet. We won a Grammy for him via Musicom, and he's just he's a monster guitar player and a huge hero of mine. And here he was on the phone, and that combo was his. And we developed he said, hey, I want to, can I write you a check? No. Okay. He goes, I'm playing at the Canyon Club in a couple weeks. Can I send you tickets? And I said, yes, I'd love to bring my wife. And so we went down and we saw him play, and he gave me his phone number. He said, text me. I want you to meet you backstage. So we go back, and, I shook his hand, and he said, hey, I brought an amp. It's in the tour bus. I don't know if it's something you want, but, take it home and try it. And I'm selling it, and see what you think. And, if you like it, send me a check. And I thought, I just met you. Like, you're gonna give me one of your amps to take home for God knows how many months, and then if I like it, I'll send you a check. Like, who does that? But it's like, okay. So he hands me a 6700 watt, what's called a Black Flag amplifier, Black Flag Marshall. They were made maybe for 2 months, Brian, in late 67.
They were made for his best estimates, roughly a 6-week period in 67.
Yeah, I mean, super, super rare. And it's his. And I bring it home, and it's in mint condition. It was a 9 out of 10. Brian spruced it up a little bit and cleaned it up, but it was all there. And, I mean, it was just ridiculous. And it was his. And he had used it on recordings. So a couple months later, he gets off tour. He calls me up. He goes, what do you think? And I go, it's unbelievable. And, it's rare as hen's teeth. And he goes, all right, just pay me what I paid for it. I was like, what? And he goes, yeah, I paid whatever the number was. I don't remember. I don't know how high. It was half of what it was worth, maybe. And I said, are you sure? He goes, yeah, just send me, And I went, okay. And that went on to this day. I probably have.
He calls every once in a while and says, hey, I'm unloading blah, blah, blah Marshall stuff that I found in storage. Are you interested?
Wow.
What a great connection.
Oh, some of the most amazing. I probably have
stars that do that with me. When they want it, because they know for decades I'm the Marshall guy. When they go to unload something, I'm usually one of the first calls, because they know that if it's not something I personally want, I have a client that I can pick up the phone and say, hey, something has come available that might be up your alley.
You treat people fair, they're going to treat you fair, It's respect,
that's true.
So
it's good vibes all around.
So the great thing about Eric is, when Brian and I decided to do this book, I called him and I said, hey, can I ask a favor? I said, it would be a real honor for you if you would, since we now know each other and we've done a lot of business together, and I've, gone to a lot of shows, would you consider writing the foreword to the book? And he said, absolutely. So we found a picture. We actually purchased a picture from a photographer that took this incredible photo of him. And Eric wrote this amazing foreword that is the foreword of the book. And while we were in the process of putting the book together and almost at the stage where we were done, Brian has a close friend who's a tour manager or production manager or something. And he was Tom Lowry. He was working with Spinal Tap. And he said, hey, I'm working with Spinal Tap. Is do you want me to tell, Nigel about the book and Marshall's and all that? And Brian goes, what do you think? I go, what do I think? I go, yes. And so we ended up having this relationship with Christopher Guest. And I said, hey, can I send you a PDF of a chapter of the book? And if you like it, would you bless us with the dedication to the book? And he wrote back within minutes and said, I'd love to. And Christopher Guest, as Nigel Tufnell, wrote, this beautiful thing about the book in character.
That's cool.
And we bought a really cool picture of him. So when you open up the book, the first thing you see, besides the table of contents and the credits page, is the dedication page from Nigel Tufnell.
What's the best way to get the book right now?
So there's two ways to get it. Collectingloudhistory.com is our website.
And I'll put that in my description.
Thank you. And the only other place, there's a brick and mortar store called Chicago Music Exchange. And Chicago Music Exchange sells autographed copies. So Brian and I send them, signed copies. On our website, they're not signed. And so either collectingloudhistory.com or Chicago Music Exchange. They have a web presence, and they also have a brick and mortar store in Chicago. And that's where you can get the book. And nice. I will tell you, if you're a Marshall guy or you just want an amazing coffin table book or something that will be worth a lot more, we printed 1,500. They came out last May. We have sold them a tremendous amount of them. We don't have a lot left. So the last book that I did started out as $100, like I said, and it's over 1,000. If you can find it, and that one was printed at 2,500. This one is 1,500 for the first edition. I don't know if we're ever going to print it again. I don't know. Brian and I paid for it out of our pockets. It was incredibly expensive because we printed it in California. We didn't send it off to China to be printed. And we wanted to keep our hands on the production of it, from the type size and the paper and the binding and the cover and the chipboard and all of that stuff. We wanted to be there every step of the way to make sure that it was
pure. Sounds like pure love.
Mm-hmm. And the quality was amazing. So it got to be very, very expensive. And we still haven't, we're just now at the point where we're breaking even. So the last, batch of books will actually be at a profit for us. We didn't do it to make money. Brian has his life. I have my life. We both, have jobs and families and wives and stuff, and we're both fine. So it wasn't a thing where let's go and see if we can make a lot of money. It was let's get this information out.
Yeah. You're sharing knowledge to the people.
Yeah. Let's get the information out because it's not out there. And now it is. So, cool. If you're looking for specifically, my birth year's, say 1972, for example, I want a Marshall from my birth year. What does it look like? Well, you go to the 1972 chapter and you open it up, and there's example after example after example of how to tell when you're buying a 72 cabinet or a 72 amplifier, and how not to walk into Guitar Center and get taken. Not that Guitar Center is going to take you, but you don't know what you're buying because to the untrained eye, they all look the same.
Your salesmen usually know nothing about the product.
Oh yeah.
They just want to get the door.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And so no dig on Guitar Center. They're a great store, and I've bought many pieces from them, but if you don't know what you're doing, it's and you have a salesman that doesn't know what he's talking about because he's not, he's a guitar guy, he's not an amp guy. It's like, here, it's a vintage Marshall, and then and the other thing is the reproductions that these companies make are really good.
Yeah.
So am I buying one from 1968 or am I buying a 68 reproduction? Like, how do I tell the difference? Well, there's just very few telltale signs. Lastly, I know you got to go. There was a time where a guy called me up and said, hey, I've got some speakers, some creamback speakers, come on down. And I was like, oh, great, it's creamback speakers. I have a 74 cabinet that's empty. It'd be a perfect match. Let me go get them. So I'm down at his place and I notice he's got a couple of Marshall cabinets there. So I said, what's the story with these? And the guy says, oh, this is it's a new replica, but, whatever. And I went, oh, okay. And I go, what are you asking for? And he goes, $500. And I go, okay. And he's doing something else with another customer. And I look at this cabinet and I go, this is not a replica. Because I can tell. I can look at the screws. I can look at the rivets. I can look at the serial number. Because of Brian. And the telltale sign was the handles. And I looked down at the handles because the replica handles have 8 holes in them and the real handles have 6 holes in them. And I looked down and it had 6 holes in it. And I went, oh shit, this is the real thing. And it was priced as a replica, not the real thing. And I said, I'll take it. And, it's like, let the buyer beware, but let the seller beware.
Yeah.
The likelihood of that happening now because of our book is a lot less.
Yeah.
So people go, why'd you give away all the secrets? And it's like, because I have enough. Brian's got enough. People should know.
By the vintage guitar market and amp dealer market around the country, around the world, as somewhat. So, because most of them don't know one year from another, they're in the ballpark or whatever. But they're knowledgeable about 15 different things, but not necessarily specific on Marshall things. So this is going to be one of those things where if somebody at a store can pull out a book from under the counter and put it up there and go, oh, I have that in front of me, match pictures in this particular chapter, or you can go to the parts chapter, which is 50 pages long at the back, and look at all the individual parts, and it tells you in the parts chapter when that part was created, when they did.
Here's an example.
Yeah.
So
different casters.
So there's a perfect example of what it looks like in the back of the book. So if you flip your cabinet over and you go, oh, let me see. Now I've got the book. Let me find the wheels. Oh, these are Homa wheels from 72 to 76 or gold. Okay, so now I've narrowed it down to that window. Let me open up the back and look at the date code and the frame numbers and the cone number. Let me look at these speakers. They may have been changed, maybe not. Maybe they're original. Let me see. Oh, those match to that period. Okay, let's look at the size of the logo. It's a medium logo. Okay, now I know we're in that window, and so that's what the beauty of this thing is. And that is not in any book anywhere.
No, basically created a Bible for Marshalls.
Correct. The salesman at Guitar Center is not looking at the wheels or the staples in a cabinet.
No, they're looking at what the big commission is for them to sell.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
it's like
a car dealership where you go to buy a car, and the salesman will tell you all kinds of nice things. And if you ask the salesman, okay, I need to know particular information about the valve train in the engine.
Mm-hmm.
He don't know nothing. You're gonna have to talk to shop.
Yeah.
And those kind of people that give you the good information is the people that tear them apart and put them back together again.
Yeah.
Man, I gotta tell you, Peter and Brian, I want to thank you both for coming on here. This was fantastic.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
get a little history of the Sunset Strip, the Randy Rhoads, to your book. I mean, it was so entertaining, and I learned so much just listening to you two guys. If you guys ever in the future ever want to come back just to shoot the crap on anything, let me know. I'll set something up, pre-record, and go for it.
Awesome. Thanks. Well, we really appreciate you guys for what you're doing.
Been nice chatting with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Really cool.
You have a great show. I watched some of your clips, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you so much for what you did for us. Yeah, we really grateful. So have a great day, and
And
we'll
who's ever watching anybody, Brian is from Hairband Basement, fantastic channel. We did 2 videos together. We did one on top 5 Ozzy albums, which was fun. We did 5 top blues rock albums or songs that we like, and so check out his channel. And beyond that, I'm gonna end it here. I want to say goodbye to everybody.
Thanks.
I will build a brighter future for everyone.